Hey, good morning, everyone. Happy Monday morning to you, and welcome back to Morning Musings. My name is Don K. Preston. I'm the president of Preterist Research Institute of Ardmore, Oklahoma. Hope you had a fantastic weekend. Hope everything was safe. Hope you're healthy. It's absolutely amazing that here we are, months and months and months into this pandemic. And someone and I were talking. I went to an automotive swap meet over the weekend, and there were just people everywhere. Now, we weren't shoulder to shoulder, and very, very, very few people were wearing face masks. And a bunch of us talked about it. And it's like, why do you suppose that there was such a large attendance at this swap meet with all of this danger of the COVID? Well, there was a consensus, and obviously this is not scientific, but the point of fact is people are sick and tired of being cooped up. And guys are ready to get out. People are ready to get out and to do things. And point number two, they are seeing that in spite of the fact that, yes, some people are dying, and listen, for those who say that COVID is not real, I have to beg to differ. I am personally aware, acutely aware of some situations. I have friends whose parents have died from the COVID. Now, they were aged, they had multiple problems, but they nonetheless died from the COVID. And yet, here's the point. Due to vastly improved therapeutics and treatments, the mortality rate of COVID is now less than 1%. It's not even as high as the mortality rate for the regular old flu. And so I'm not a conspiratorialist most of the time, but it seems to me like this entire thing is being used for political purposes. And I don't like that at all. But I won't go any further than that. I would just simply say that precautions, normal precautions against any viral infection are wise. Okay? But for us to shut down our nation, to shut down the world over an infection whose mortality rate is less than 1%, seems to me a bit extreme. That's just one man's opinion. I'm just giving that as one man's opinion. And we move on. All right, we are looking at the Olivet Discourse, Matthew 25, 1 to 13, and the parable of the coming of the bridegroom for his bride and the five wise, five foolish virgins. Now, let me remind you that one of the most basic presuppositions of concerning the Olivet Discourse is that Jesus discussed two subjects. Number one, the fall of Jerusalem, his coming in that event in AD 70. That's the amillennial, that's the postmillennial view. From verse 35 and following, or verse 36 and following, we are told that Jesus transitioned to discussing the so-called end of the world, the end of the current Christian age. Well, as I've said many, many times, don't forget, folks, the current Christian age has no end. Now, if the current Christian age has no end, then in Matthew 25 or 24, 36 through chapter 25, verse 46, Jesus is not discussing the end of the current Christian age. Isn't that simple? It's profound, but it's simple. And thus attempts to divide the Olivet Discourse fail. Well, we've been examining the motif of the wedding. And I have shown you that the promise of the wedding was never a promise that was made to the church, isolated from, independent of, divorced from, a little bit of a pun intended, divorced from God's Old Covenant promises made to Old Covenant Israel. God had been married to Israel. She committed spiritual adultery. God divorced Israel. God said that in the last days he would likewise kill Judah. Judah would have her harvest. And that would be at the end of the age, Matthew 13. And thus in the New Testament, when we see this terminology of the coming harvest, when we see the terminology of the wedding banquet, the messianic banquet, we can call it the resurrection banquet. When we see this terminology and when we see these motifs, we need to see that we are reading about the fulfillment, first century fulfillment of God's Old Covenant promises made to Old Covenant Israel. We have spent some time in the book of Revelation demonstrating that the book of Revelation is about the harvest of Judah as Babylon. Revelation chapter 14. We are told about this great harlot city Babylon, and at her judgment, at her destruction, we have the harvest because her sins have reached to the heavens, just as Isaiah 59 said they would in the last days. Just as Jesus said Jerusalem and Judah would fill up the measure of her sin in that generation, just as Paul said Jerusalem and Judea and the Jews were filling up the measure of their sin in the first century. Now, in spite of all of the evidence that we have given, and by the way, I give all of this evidence and a whole lot more in my book, Who Is This Babylon? You can go to my website, donkpreston.com, BibleProphecy.com, and order the book. And by the way, as I have mentioned earlier, Doug Wilkinson has a brand new book out. It's interesting, it's challenging, fascinating, and it's certainly different, okay? But if you order Who Is This Babylon, and you send me a note that says, hey, Don, I saw your offer on YouTube or Facebook, I will pay your shipping, I'll refund your shipping of $4.95, and I will include, free of charge, a copy of Doug Wilkinson's new book entitled Kingdom of the Martyrs. So take advantage of that. Now look, if you order Who Is This Babylon on this order or on this special offer, you got to send me a note that says, hey, Don, I want a copy of Kingdom of the Martyrs, or I want a copy of Doug's book, or something like that, just to let me know to refund your shipping and to include a free copy of this book. So, in spite of all this evidence that we have given, we have people who insist, well, Babylon, and this is the way I was raised, by the way, we have people who tell us, well, Babylon of Revelation, that was Rome. Well, if that's the case, then we have to ask ourselves the question, in what way was Rome ever married to God? Remember, I've brought forth a wealth of information, and once again, there's a whole lot more in my book, Who Is This Babylon, that I haven't taken the time to share with you. So in what way was Rome ever married to Yahweh? In what way was Rome ever in a covenant relationship with Yahweh? In what way was there ever to be a harvest at the judgment of Rome? And I would even ask the question, when and how did Rome ever fill up the measure of her sin as a result of killing the prophets, being where the Lord was slain? Rome was not where the Lord was crucified, and of killing the apostles and prophets of Jesus. Folks, listen to me. I was raised believing that Babylon was Rome, and the beast was the Roman Catholic Church, or the Pope. But when you realize that the city of Rome never did, could not have done what Babylon in Revelation did, then we have to eliminate Rome as Babylon. Secondly, some people tell us, well, Babylon in the book of Revelation was literal Babylon in Iraq. Oh, and some people point and they say, oh, look, see, Saddam Hussein was trying to rebuild Babylon. Well, it didn't work, did it? That failed. He was not Nebuchadnezzar reincarnated. But more importantly, once again, literal Babylon in Iraq never killed an Old Testament prophet. Do you realize? Hey, I was in a radio program some years ago. Guy called in and he said, literal Babylon in Iraq, that is Babylon of Revelation. And I asked him, I said, well, sir, I appreciate you calling in, but let me ask you a question. I said, which Old Testament prophet did literal Babylon in Iraq ever kill? And he just blurted right out, well, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And then, the train ran over him. And he goes, well, wait. I said, yes, sir, let me just, interject here. Babylon, literal Babylon, tried to kill Old Testament prophets. They tried to kill Daniel. Remember the story of Daniel in the lion's den? Couldn't do it. They tried to kill Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego. They couldn't do it. Literal Babylon in Iraq never, ever killed an Old Testament prophet. And it's most assuredly not where the Lord was crucified. And it was not spiritually called Sodom or Egypt. And America has been identified as Babylon. I'm sorry, America never killed. Not one. Not one single Old Covenant prophet. It's not where the Lord was crucified, and it never killed an apostle or prophet of Jesus. When you just go down the list of proposed Babylons, and you compare that city with the actual deeds and actions of Babylon of Revelation, only one city can be identified as Babylon of Revelation. That is Old Covenant Jerusalem. She is the only city that was ever married to Yahweh. She is the city that killed the Old Covenant prophets. She is where the Lord was crucified. She is the city that was guilty of causing the death of the apostles and prophets of Jesus. Her sin was filled up in that generation, and thus John was told over and over and over again that her judgment was at hand, coming shortly, soon, and quickly. No other city qualifies. Hey, be sure to get a copy of Who Is This Babylon and request this. Total delivered price, U.S. orders only, $25. And by the way, I don't have PDF copies of this, so I can't even help you out on that. Okay, thanks for joining me for this morning's morning musings. Now listen, beginning in the morning, on the flip side, I'm going to be examining Old Covenant prophecies concerning, we've already looked at Hosea, but we're going to look at a few key Old Covenant prophecies of the time and the context of the wedding, which will further nail down the fact that the wedding was between Yahweh, the whole house of Israel, and it would occur at the time of the judgment of Judah and Jerusalem. You don't want to miss it. I'll see you on the flip side.